It is just recently that we have begun to discover our cultural heritage as Westerners. It is a culture rich in legend and story. Our culture reflects the relationship between people and the land. Vast spaces, small communities, and lone individuals collide. From this collision, a unique culture has emerged. Our culture as Montanans reveals our attempts to come to terms with nature and ourselves. This culture is rooted in a strongly felt sense of place.
I think the sense of place in Montana is probably more important than it is any other place in the Union. The great histories of Montana have been written by people who were born and raised here. The great literature of Montana has been written by native Montanans. That doesn't show any sign of letting up. So I think roots in Montana are important for a cultural contribution.
There's just something about the country, the landscape, the quietness, the element of the people involved that make it very conducive to a painter, which I think is quite illustrated by the fact that there are so many painters here.
Once I'd come to Montana, I was overwhelmed with the sense of wanting to stay here. In fact, our first weekend in Missoula, we were just amazed by this unspoken feeling of how different it was and how much we liked it. And over the time that we've lived here, it's just gotten deeper and richer feeling.
The land profoundly affects artists of all kinds. Writers, potters, painters, and musicians find inspiration here.
I use landscapes or scenes, places, generally small towns, banks of rivers and so forth. There's a sort of a stage setting where something can get going, and that something is usually a phrase, a rhythm, a set of verbal, a sequence of verbal sounds, and then I can be off and running, you see. For some reason, Montana is a state where there are a lot of places that do turn me on. I don't know why. I think it's I've always been somewhat addicted to the out of the way, the places that I feel other people ignore.
Montana is a very paradoxical state. Every time you have a virtue, you can turn it over and see it as a liability. For instance, the great space that we have can be seen as a place where everything is possible, and nobody owns everything yet, and you can do what you want to, and you're not hemmed in by a lot of taboos and so forth. But by the same token, that space isolates you, and so the need for connecting with other people becomes more acute, I'd say.
The past 14 years that I've been in the art business, I've seen artists move into the area for the same reason that I moved here, because it was so beautiful. You see, in our valley and of course in the state itself, there's everything here for the artist to paint. There's mountains, there's streams, there's the prairie. I mean, he can reminisce back into the days of Russell and get out there and paint. We have Glacier Park, Yellowstone Park. So it's just great.
You might come here Sunday on a whim. Say your life broke down. The last good kiss you had was years ago. You walk these streets laid out by the insane, past hotels that didn't last, bars that did, the tortured try of local drivers to accelerate their lives. Only churches are kept up. The jail turns 70 this year. The only prisoner is always in, not knowing what he's done. The principle supporting business now is rage, hatred of the various grays the mountain sends, hatred of the mill, the silver bill repeal, the best liked girls who leave each year for Butte. One good restaurant and bars can't wipe the boredom out. The 1907 boom, 8 going silver mines, a dance floor built on springs. All memory resolves itself in gaze. In panoramic green, you know the cattle eat, or 2 stacks high above the town, 2 dead kilns, the huge mill in collapse for 50 years that won't fall finally down. Isn't this your life, that ancient kiss still burning out your eyes? Isn't this defeat so accurate the church bell simply seems a pure announcement, ring and no one comes? Don't empty houses ring? Are magnesium and scorn sufficient to support a town, not just Phillipsburg, but towns of towering blondes, good jazz and booze the world will never let you have until the town you came from dies inside? Say no to yourself. The old man, 20 when the jail was built, still laughs, although his lips collapse. Someday soon, he says, I'll go to sleep and not wake up. You tell him no, you're talking to yourself. The car that brought you here still runs. The money you buy lunch with, no matter where it's mined, is silver, and the girl who serves you food is slender, and her red hair lights the wall.
Artists have always tried to capture the ordinary and the extraordinary in Montana. Past and present alike make up our culture, our sense of self. That's why institutions which preserve, promote, and display our culture play a critical role. In Montana, dozens of museums and galleries foster the study of our history by displaying artifacts and maintaining documents. Significant findings have been made in Montana in the fields of anthropology and paleontology. These findings can be seen in regional museums, like the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman. Our institutions encourage the appreciation of art as well. Community-based art galleries, like the Hockaday Art Center, stimulate interest at the local level. Meanwhile, state and federally supported institutions like the Montana Committee for the Humanities, the Montana Arts Council, and the Montana Historical Society provide money and support for a variety of cultural activities statewide.
It's always seemed to me that the main function the Historical Society provides for artists, for writers in particular perhaps, is as a keeper of records and a provider of records. Our past is slipping away so fast that we hardly know that it's gone. And I'm particularly interested in some of the things the Historical Society has done with, say, photo archives that have retained these things for us to examine.
The Arts Council exists in this state to support all the arts in many ways, but part of it's with money, part of it's with organizational support. In other words, the kind of assistance that organizations need to become stronger and to reach more people. So it is an element of state government, and its function really is to support the arts in all of its aspects across the state.
Well, the Hockaday Center for the Arts is the only cultural facility in northwest Montana. And in that, we're responsible for bringing in work from outside the area for residents in the northwest Montana to observe and see and participate in, as well as respond to what's being done in the area. So it's kind of a twofold, going outside, bringing in things that are not readily accessible from other galleries.
The main purpose of the Humanities Committee has always been to foster humanities discussion on public policies issues. It's been in the last few years that the Humanities Commission has been allowed by public statute to get into other areas. And one of the earliest efforts that the Humanities Committee has attempted has been a closer look at historical provisions.
First of all, institutionally, you have to have a way to preserve what's going on so that people can get a chance to get some distance and reflect on it. In other cases, you need a dynamic to see what's going on. In many cases, your historical institutions preserve the past. In other cases, your art centers are really giving you a reflection on a dynamic of the present. So you put those two together, past and present, and you start to get a sense of place.
The Museum of the Rockies is dedicated to the interpretation of the physical and cultural heritage of the Northern Rockies. Our theme is that of one place through all of time. In other words, we're interested in the region from its geologic formation to the present. including its prehistory and its history. Some of the ways that we accomplish our goals are through research, exhibits, public programs, teaching at the university and in the public school system, and in publications. Some of the research that we're currently involved in includes the world-famous dinosaur locality at Choteau, where we have dinosaur eggs, babies, juveniles, adults, even embryonic bones, and literally hundreds of specimens of dinosaurs. We are involved in research there at the international level. In addition to that, we're involved in the archaeologic excavations at Indian Creek. There, we're taking a look at some of the earliest inhabitants in our region, Native Americans who were here more than 11,000 years ago, up to the land surface at about 1943. Also, we have a very active research program going in homesteading. Many people don't realize, but our region was the most successful region in the nation in the numbers of patented homesteads, and yet we know virtually nothing about it. This research is soon to go statewide and will result in a homesteading exhibit in the museum with a complete homestead, fully interpreted, and all of these projects are based on research that we are doing here at the museum. The Museum of the Rockies is a part of Montana State University, and it shares in its research, education, and public service mission.
Our university system has also served as a major sponsor of art and culture in Montana. We look to our schools for art, drama, music, and literature.
What the indelible impression of a university or a college in a community is, just by taking a comparison between Deer Lodge 1900 and Bozeman 1900. Deer Lodge got the prison, and that attracted a certain type of workforce, a certain type of support community. And Bozeman got what eventually became Montana State University, and that attracts a very particular set of individuals, types of people. If we were to now look at the two communities in terms of their growth and the influence that the institution has on the community, it ought to be fairly clear that Montana State University influences Bozeman in a very different way than Deer Lodge receives from having the state prison there. The state itself has seen an enormous amount of dependence upon the university system for cultural and social activities that take place because we reach out, we touch other parts of the state.
400 years ago, a painter needed a patron. He needed to be supported by a rich person. And today, not many poets can make a living writing poetry. They need a job. And institutions like universities, art centers, historical societies can give those artists a job, make them teach for a living. But at the same time, it gives them the security, the income that they need to engage in creative endeavors that might not be immediately remunerative. So I think it's no coincidence that our most well-known historians, poets, even to some extent writers, are located in institutions of higher learning, comparable groups around the state.
Our cultural institutions would have a hard time surviving were it not for our primary culture makers, the artists. The number of Montana artists who have made national and international reputations is remarkably large for a state of our size. Our ceramic artists are known throughout the world. Our writers, our painters, are beginning to receive a recognition that was long overdue.
Well, against a background of such historical figures such as Russell, Paxson, Seltzer, we see the emergence of Montana artists and writers in the personages of Christopher Parkening, Dick Hugo, A.B. Guthrie, Doig, Jim Welch, or the students of Francis Senska, Rudy Audio, and Peter Vokas. And they are beginning to get national recognition.
We're generating our own artists, our own writers, our own poets, our own historians. They seem to be located in the institutions like the universities and art councils and the historical societies that exist to foster such expressions. And I think Montanans take pride in their own. It's not some outsider that's writing novels about us.
We are a large art colony. A number of artists have been here, have been supported by galleries and patrons, and around them an even larger group of artists has developed. The community itself is interested in art and anxious for the arts. They perhaps have grown up here and maybe didn't have a lot of art as they grew up, because there are now a lot of artists that are depicting their land, their mountains, their lakes, their animals. They're turned on to art.
The culture is getting bigger and bigger all the while. People are broadening their spectrum of art, and we are very, very fortunate, and I sincerely mean this, that we are living in a state where it's so beautiful that it is attracting artists who can produce art to sell to these people that come here to look for it.
One of the most successful and influential cultural institutions in Montana is a magazine, Montana, the magazine of Western history. It is published by the Montana Historical Society. In the early 1960s, the magazine changed its format to attract a larger audience, and it became one of the most popular history journals in the nation.
It's always been my feeling that it's one of the first of the historical quarterlies to try to get to a broad audience, not just academic people, but a general readership. I believe that it has made a contribution in that area that has been widely copied. When I was editor, I got letters frequently from other editors who wished to make their more scholarly journals more palatable or understandable to the reading public, to the general public. In other words, making history available and usable to a very broad audience.
The old view, of course, is the romance of Montana, of the West. 19th century, Lewis and Clark, mountain men, vigilantes, cowboys and Indians, Custer's Last Stand. I'll wager that 99% of the literature and 99% of the history ever written about Montana deals with those subjects, 19th century romance.
A lot of people mined the West for stories. People wrote westerns. I guess we'd really have to distinguish between two kinds of writing, kind of popular genre writing, the Western and so forth, and what we'd call serious writers in the past.
Critics live on the east and west coasts. Many have felt that Western art, and that includes literature, was in some way inferior. Some of it was. But the main problem with the culture in the West is that it is simply different.
My experience has been that there is a difference between Eastern style and Western style. Easterners tend to be more analytical. They tend to examine the self more and try to figure out how that self stacks up against other selves. I think the Western style is more flying by the seat of the pants, more self-reliant, more trusting the self.
Western style is basically distinguished by its subject matter and the realism, the realistic portrayal of its subject matter. The Western artists are depicting our land, our animals, our traditional roots and heritage, the cowboys and Indians thing. That's their subject matter. Their style is very, very realistic. the Eastern artists, or the contemporary artists, if you will, are perhaps not realistic. They're perhaps more abstract, such as the work in this gallery.
Education must take place in order for the spirit of the West to capture people. In Montana, that process is occurring throughout the state, for everyone.
We have had over 4,000 children through the exhibits with trained guides, and the children's responses to things, I think, depends a lot upon what their parents are telling them. We have a lot of kids who just are even more adamant than the adults that that stinks, that stuff stinks, that's terrible, I could have done that. And they really freak out about the prices. You know, when they see that the price on something might be $2,000, boy, they cannot understand that at all.
We know that audiences are growing. I think part of that is the fact that there's a different educational level, different experiential level amongst the citizenry, because more and more individuals are, in fact, if I can use an old time-worn expression, leaving the farm and going to the city. We're educating more people relative to the qualities of life that the arts represent. And I think that when individuals return to or become members of new communities and have a taste for and a feeling of necessity to experience the arts.
The people in Montana wanting to see more of our own images that are coming out of artists from Montana, and also wanting to see more of what's being done in other areas. And then at the same time, the artists in Montana are gaining reputation nationally, so there's an outreaching of the arts in Montana outside to the rest of the nation, and then also coming in of those arts to areas in Montana.
I think everyone is astounded, in fact, about the growth of interest in art, just as an example. And hand in hand with that is of history. There's an enormous interest on the part of even young people that I have talked to about their heritage and their roots and so on. And I think the old myth about this being such a cultural desert is quickly coming to an end. I think part of that is because of this Western art thing that we won't go into that, but the truth is that the big wheels in New York now are recognizing this as a valid school of art simply because it's demanding and getting enormous prices. But aside from that, I think the insular qualities of life in Montana has come to an end. It began, of course, when we became a state, but just in recent years, I think that people not only are intrigued with the beauties of this land, that it hasn't too many people yet, but they take seriously now people who work here. The contributions of many, many people are being recognized, and I think that the acceptance of culture, history, and so on, I think, in other words, that we are finding our identity at last.
Our culture is all around us, if we only look. Every county has a historical society dedicated to preserving local history. Many communities have art centers and art festivals. County fairs always have art exhibits along with livestock and produce. Writers, painters, musicians live among us, our neighbors. The real West, our West, never much resembled the Hollywood model. We have begun to reconsider our heritage as Westerners. The rest of the country and the world are beginning to appreciate this new version of the West. And finally, we are too.